Hey, it's Francis Lamb, host of The Splendid Table. Every week on our show, we talk about food and cooking and the meanings of food and cooking. We talk with the most interesting people in food about their techniques, their culture, and everything in between. Whether it's about how fried chicken took over the world or how Instagram changes the way people are actually eating. It's a food show where everyone is welcome. Come join us. You can listen to The Splendid Table wherever you get your podcasts.
Westholme is working with the land to create nature-led Australian Wagyu. Westholme believes that when nature leads, flavor follows. Learn more at westholme.com.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Hey, welcome to Beer Sessions Radio on Heritage Radio Network. I'm Jimmy Carboni, I'm the host, and it's our 15th season, and it's 15 years celebrating heritageradionetwork.org. So we're in the studio at Roberta's Pizza, which is always the best place to record and to hang out, and looking forward to trying a number of OEC Brewing beers today because, yes, it is one of my favorite breweries, and they'll be celebrating their 10th anniversary. So we've got a room full of OEC guests. And let's go around the room and you guys introduce yourselves.
I'm Ben Neidhart. I'm the owner of OEC Brewing.
Welcome.
Mike Dolan, Be United.
Welcome.
And I'm Tom Pavlich with Be United, and Mike and I also represent OEC in New York City.
Great. Well, let's make a toast and cheers to you guys. So,
cheers, Jimmy.
I remember when you guys opened, you passed that down to Ben. When you guys opened, and I walked in today, and I was thinking of all the different reps who've been associated with Be United and OEC. And it was about 2014, maybe 2015. I went to visit your guys' compound in Oxford, Connecticut, and it was just a wonderful experience. So, you give us a little backstory on OEC, and tell everyone what Be United is too, if they're not familiar with it.
Be United is my family's company. My dad owns it. He's run it since 1995, and it's an importing company that brings in beer, sake, cider, and mead from all over the world. A lot of interesting stuff. OEC Brewing started about 10 years ago. It will be 10 years ago next week. And we started as a sour beer blending brewery, and we've since evolved to do a lot of interesting stuff. And we dabble in all kinds of different styles at this point. We have a unique brewing system that combines very new age technology with a lot of what you would consider outdated brewing techniques. And when you walk right into the tasting room, you see the brew house right there on your right, and it looks very modern in the sense it's got this computer in the center, looks almost like a DJ booth, and it's shiny, polished stainless steel on the outside. But on the inside, we have the copper direct fired kettle. We have a cool ship. We don't have a whirlpool. Everything has to go through the cool ship. We do traditional open fermentation, and it's a very interesting system.
Yeah, well, proof's in the pudding. It's something whenever I say OEC, I'll get it over most other beers. I remember when I first went, I was with a couple other beer experts, and you guys were then even kind of with a growler fill. You had some beers in a capped bottle, and I remember one of them was a Berliner Weiss, and the talk was that your beers were made so well in the way that they were, filled into that bottle that they would last longer than most Berliner Weiss. That's one of the anecdotes I have from then. Trying to get you to talk more about those days and things you've learned.
Yeah, so when we started as a blending operation, we started with the Zimmatori project before OEC Brewing, and that's where we took from United International. We worked with some of the producers that we were importing at the time to do various barrel-aged versions of their beers in the U.S. And we would source unique barrels coming from all over the world, either South Africa or Napa, California, anything we could really find at the time. And we tried out all kinds of different styles of beer, different barrel styles, and we matured them sometimes for usually on average at least 6 months to up to 2 years. and then learn to blend back together. And so, of course, when I started OEC Brewing, we integrated that into a lot of the products we started doing with initially. So we did a lot of spontaneous fermentation. We did a lot of barrel aging. We did a lot of blending. And one of the things that we always prided ourselves in every single sour that we did is they're all naturally produced. So the souring is only done by lactobacillus and wild occurring yeast that are from the barrels themselves. We're not doing any type of kind of lactic fermentation in the stainless steel tanks. So everything is naturally occurring, and it takes time. So it's a natural preservation process that's really unique. And it can take a beer such as the Berliner Weisse that you talk about, which is not very strong. It's like 3.8% in alcohol. We mature that for 6 to 12 months in oak and then blend it back together. And then we give it one more natural fermentation before it goes into bottle by adding a little bit of sugar and yeast, and it would naturally condition and produce carbonation in that bottle. And that bottle could sit for 5 to 7 years and it would stand up extremely well, even at a low ABV, which is pretty amazing because it's the polar opposite of what modern day IPA brewing is, right? In that sense, you use all this technology, you use all this chemical, you do all this stuff, and then you have a beer that has to be drunk in 3 weeks. But this one can go years.
I knew that I liked OEC that day when I was drinking the Berliner Weisse 10 years ago, because up to that point I'd been to a number of new breweries, or always heard that it was the first beer that many brewers made because it was easy, and I just assumed it was a cheap, not a beer I'd ever want to drink again. But you really changed my mind on that.
Yes.
One of the really cool things to talk about too is it's Mike Dolan again, is the Casper Schultz brew house that we have, right? Can you speak to that and its design, how it's a piece of history that there's not many like that, right, out there?
No. So one of the reasons we chose Casper Schultz out of Bamberg is that they were one of the few producers of brewing equipment that could still weld copper to stainless steel. And our kettle is actually copper on the inside for the direct fire kettle, which allows better heat transfer than a stainless steel system. But what you see on a lot of these brew pub systems is that they're outside shiny copper, which is just decorative. So ours is the copper on the inside, so it's functional, and it's actually shiny stainless steel on the outside. So it's the opposite. And then we have a traditional German system. So we have that kind of mash/boil kettle, and then we have a lauter tun with it. So everything goes up through the lauter tun. That allows us to do decoctions, turbid mashes, all kinds of different mash schedules. And then we do not have a whirlpool unlike most modern systems. So we have to send every single beer that we do through our cool ship. And if it's a clean beer, it'll spend about 1 hour in the cool ship, and then it'll go over our Bouteille cooler, which is an open counterflow cooler. Very few of these systems are still in use today, but it's a really interesting device where you push the cold water into the bottom, and it's all these pipes that kind of go up, and the beer cascades down the outside of the pipes, starts very, very warm, and then cools down, and you recollect the whole hot water at the top for the next brewing day. But at the bottom, the wort drops down into the trough, and that also allows you to aerate at the same time. And then from there on, we go down by gravity into our open fermentation tanks downstairs. I've only seen one active Bouteille cooler left, and that's at the Dole Brewers in Belgium.
Yeah, I always tell people,
great company.
this is Tom Pavlich. I always tell people when I'm talking about OEC, our system makes the company so fun to talk about. When we talk about the Bouteille cooler, I always mention that the only two other ones I know of in the U.S. are in the Sierra Nevada and I think the Firestone Walker museums. They're not even active in the breweries, so they're like pieces of historical equipment. And the other fun part about our system for Mike and I is that when Americans typically hear cool ship, they instantly think sour beer, because almost all other breweries in the U.S. are exclusively using their cool ships to make sour ales, whereas we have this beautiful cool ship room that is sterile that we can make beautiful lagers in. So it's like this, people see cool ship on our lager cans and think they're going to be sour lagers, but in actuality, they're like, we're using it in the very traditional European sense of heat transfer rather than souring.
Yes, that's true. The other thing that we do that I think is very unique to our brewery is every single beer that we do is open fermented in traditional German fermenters that are really nice. Also from Kaspar Schulz, the shape is what really sets them apart, and it's about 1-to-1 in the dimension from height to width in the way that the beer sits, and that puts as little pressure and hydrostatic pressure on the yeast as possible, and really allows the yeast to be expressive.
Tom, what was the first beer that we had?
The first beer, I'll let Ben speak to this a little bit more, is OEC's new pale ale called Rocket Science.
Yes, it's Rocket Science. So before we turned 10 years old, we thought it might be interesting to make a pale ale finally that we've never done before. And this one is about 4.5%, and we use about 50 to 60% Pilsner malt, and the rest is pale ale malt. It's a very easy drinking beer using some American hops, Simcoe, Centennial, and Atana. And when we were thinking of names about this beer, since we thought it was so easy drinking, we were thinking about all these names with the easy and be nice and simple. And then we said we should just call it Rocket Science because, hey, this beer isn't rocket science. You should just drink it and enjoy it. And
but you know, when you were talking about your historical brewery, I mean, that is kind of rocket science.
Yes, and the irony in the name is for two reasons. One is our system is obviously quite complicated. So yes, this beer also had to go through the coolship and the bouteille and the open fermentation. But also because of the characteristics of our brewing system and the open fermentation, not all the yeasts like our system. So it's been a struggle for us to actually try this out. So we failed 3 times to make this beer successfully. And we had different things go wrong from either the yeast or maybe a little bit too much hops or so. So this is our 3rd attempt. So while this beer is easy drinking and it's not rocket science, for us, it actually was a little bit of rocket science in terms of how hard it was to make.
So why do you call it a pale ale? Because I feel like, I mean, this is kind of for the sales guys too, is, you know, you don't really describe what OEC beers are, but you drink them and you remember them. So the fact that this is a pale ale, I'm like, okay, it's a pale ale.
Yeah.
But I don't think of it as a pale ale. I think of it as like a country beer.
It is in one sense, but we kind of give it the descriptor to help people kind of understand what they're getting into. And so that was the best description that we thought of at the time. It's really almost a combination in the drinkability of what we would consider like a Pilsner with that pale ale characteristics. It's not too heavy on the pale ale malts. It's very crisp and it's enjoyable. And then you get that hop character with it, which we really enjoy.
And so one fun thing about, like Ben was saying previously, I don't know if we said it on the show or if it was before started, that it has like the easy drinkingness of the Pilsner with the aromatics of a pale ale. And one of the things that I talk about as a person who represents the Be United and OEC catalogs as a whole is pale ale is a very specific thing in America. Like Sierra Nevada pale ale kind of defined what an American pale ale is. But in the rest of the world, a pale ale is often just a pale colored beer. So like it can mean various different things depending on where it's brewed, whether it's Belgium or China, etc. So it's like that idea of a pale ale being like, it's an ale that is pale.
Could be an English bitter.
Yeah, or look at like we talked jokingly about the Dola. Look at that. Our beers, they're pale ale, right? And I mean, if you put that in front of anyone and ask them to drink it, and it's like, is this a pale ale? And they're like, no. But you know,
what's the ABV on that one?
Probably, knowing him, 8.5 easy. Yeah. I think it's listed at 7.5.
Wow. And how is it for you? You know, I mean, you've kind of grown up with the best portfolio of beer that I can think of, and meeting a lot of these, you know, traditional brewers. I mean, what are some moments that stood out for you in your education?
Well, it's been great because I've been able to actually work at a number of these places, and I mean, it's pretty transformative when you spend some time working at like Esch Schlenkerle, Brauerei Haller-Trum in Bamberg, Germany, and you see the whole process on what they do. In this case, they're one of the last true breweries that's also their own maltsters, and they do the malting and the smoking of all their malt themselves. you see how the flavor transforms from their malting to their smoking to their beer in the end. Then I spent some time working as well at Domaine Dupont, which is a cider producer in Normandy, France. And you see how cider production is and the different techniques they use. One of the most interesting things that I've gotten from all those experiences is that I enjoy all these different classes of beverages for what they are and how they're uniquely created. That's also been one of the most enjoyable things about, for example, running OEC is I've done interesting sour beer blends with blending sour beer and cider or blending sour beer and sake, both of which I think are really interesting to do.
Interesting.
I was just going to say that kind of speaks to the culture of OEC and B United in general, is that if you're going to be an innovator, you have to create an environment where you can fail acceptably, right? And you can experiment. And I think Ben has tried that a lot and bounces ideas off Tom and I and everyone else in the company. We're really collaborative on what will work, what won't work. Let's try something as it's young in the tank, as it's later in the tank. Like, let's talk about things. And maybe it's the fifth batch that finally, turns out to be the one, but we're not afraid to try and experiment, which is for me really exciting.
No, that's great. So going back to your 10-year anniversary is coming up. So 10 years ago when I first visited, I remember that you have things growing, and it's almost a farm setting where your brewery is. I remember there were some fruit plants, and it might have been your dad said that you were going to propagate yeast from those. And then there was a little oven, and you guys were talking about roasting some of the barrel staves. I don't know. Is that still kind of the experimentation that you're doing at that scale?
We still use all that stuff in different ways. So we still have our line of beers that we call experimentalis, where they're only produced with fruits that are grown on the property. We have that. My dad now has actually expanded it, so he uses a number of the fruits in his coffee roasting project. So he does a partial fermentation on the green coffee beans that he gets with a product from OEC or B United International, some fruits and the staves of the barrels that are soaked. And that fermentation takes roughly 2 to 3 weeks, and then he roasts it for coffee. So we use it in the beer and like that. My mother takes care of the greenhouses. So it's funny because we started with, when you were there, we had maybe 2 greenhouses at the time. The first one we put in the worst location on our lot. The second one we got better. And the third one we finally kind of figured out how to do it. Interestingly enough, in our climate up in Connecticut up there, the winters are the hardest, not because of the temperature, but because of the amount of humidity that collects in the greenhouses, which was a unique problem, which we just did not expect. So we learned to adjust in terms of heating, but also lots of ventilation and tons of fans and air movement. So the third greenhouse, our biggest, that's really dedicated to mostly citrus fruits. And we do a lot of those. But then, like you said, on the hillsides, we have all kinds of raspberry bushes. We have currants, we have cherries and those things.
And then, do you grow yuzu?
Yes, in the greenhouses. That's right.
Yeah.
Loads of grapes too, as well, that we use.
We have some grapes that we use in beer as well. Yes.
I say yuzu because I remember when Hitachino, which is your family imported, first came out with their yuzu beer.
Yeah.
A long time ago. And no one knew what yuzu was. Was it cherries? Was it oranges?
Yeah, and no, everyone knows what yuzu is.
Yeah. So for you, Tom, it's funny. We were on the way in today. The beers that you guys import and now that you make mean a lot to me, and it's definitely more than a sign of quality. I actually love them. And I was thinking about all the different reps and people that have worked with you guys over the years, and I walked in. But Tom, did you first find out about this company from the radio show? I'd love to hear the story.
So I didn't first find out about the company from the radio show. I'd been a fan of B United and OEC for a long time. We were talking about, I bartended Burp Castle in the East Village for a long time, and then again at Browery Lane in Greenpoint. And I think it was 2017, I got to go up to one of the open days at B United. And I remember the pivotal point for me was talking to Matthias and realizing that he didn't import everything from a supplier. It was handpicked items the portfolio is really, really curated. I knew from that point on that I was going to apply if there was a job. And when I finally did apply and got an interview, I started searching through the Beer Session Radio's archives, and Matthias and Ben and former reps had all been on the show, and I ended up listening to all of those before I interviewed. And it did help me, it helped me in my interviews and to get the job.
Thank you. The archival quality, we love it. And Mike, for you, how did you start working with Be United?
I'll never forget this day. It was a fateful day in September 2015, and I had just waited in line at Other Half, 5 a.m, to pick up some cases of beer from Other Half, and my buddies said, "Hey, let's go to Connecticut. We know these guys that are doing something really cool." And I went up to the tasting room and ordered a 9-beer tasting flight from Tony Polino, the guy who runs a tasting room and former brewer and wears many hats up there. And it just blew my mind. And at that point, I was a pretty good consumer of beer, but I had just been shown something that was completely new and mind-blowing. And it took about 7 years later, but the idea was to give up everything and work for OEC and Be United.
That's great.
It took a while, and it worked out.
So when I was there in 2014, you first went in 2015. So what's the OEC brewery like now? And also in terms of a consumer, if I were to visit.
It's Ben from OEC Brewing. The selection has changed quite a bit. We have a much wider selection. We originally only started with about at any point having 5 to 6 taps on, and they were all sour at the time, really. Now we have almost 20 items at one given time on draft, including one is usually a hand pump, for kind of English style beers that we do. Those we run kind of seasonally, because in the summertime it's too warm for that. But of those 19 other lines at any given point, we usually have 5 to 6 sours on. And then the rest, now we do a lot of traditional kind of lagers as well. We do rocket science, like we talked about, the Oolong Kolsch, which we're tasting right now, actually, which is really interesting, where we add both the oolong and the tangerine peel in the cool ship during the brewing process. The brewery, when you walk in, is still pretty similar. You can see everything. You can see the brew house, and you can see the cool ship, and you can see the Bouteille cooler. But the downstairs has changed a lot. We brought in these nice open fermentation tanks from Kaspar Schultz. They're all downstairs. I tried to pick the tile that has the most fleur-de-lis that I could find in it. And then outside...
That's your theme.
That's my theme. I grew up playing with the Lego Knight sets a lot. I was into that. I was born in Germany, in Stuttgart, and I really liked playing with the Knights, and I kind of liked the artwork back from them, and like a lot of like the naming and the playfulness and the mysticism. And I kind of based that on the kind of Lego Knights, but also Monty Python style comedy kind of side of it.
I think everyone, when you first learned what OEC meant, say it in Latin and then in English.
Oh, God. I'm going to butcher it in Latin, just like they do in Monty Python, because it's really badly conjugated Latin. It's Ordinum Eccentrici Coctores. But it really means Order of the Eccentric Boilers. Because at the time with Be United or so, we were also planning to do a lot of interesting collaborative projects with the international producers that we had. And so that's why we called it an Order of Eccentric, because obviously at the time what we were doing was quite out there. And then Boilers, because originally they didn't have the name brewer, because nobody knew what fermentation was. It didn't really exist. It wasn't until Pasteur came along that they knew that the yeast was what was fermenting the beer. So you weren't called a brewer, you're called a boiler, because it looks the same. The bubbles start going, the foam rises on top, so you boiled it twice. You boiled it by heating it the first time, and then when the fermentation happened, then you boiled it again. So if you had one pot that wasn't fermenting yet, you would put it next to the one that is, so it could learn to ferment. That's kind of...
Can you also talk about the size of the system and how it's not designed at all for clean lagers, but that's what we do a little bit? I think people would be surprised by that, right?
Yes. Well, like I said at the beginning, we were only planning to kind of be a very eccentric brewery, almost all sour beers exclusively. So we had set up the system to be unique with a cool ship and a Bouteille only. And it was really set up to make really unique mashes, worts, and beers. And then later on, when we decided, hey, maybe we want to expand our range and try new things, because at one point you always want to challenge yourself. We're like, hey, I think we should be able to make a great lager out of this, so let's do it. And then we had to run around a lot of challenges because, like you said, the system wasn't set up for that. So we did steps over time to improve it. But that's why I also think almost nobody in the US is going through their cool ship or Bouteille cooler to make a clean beer, because it's a lot of work.
Yeah, for sure.
Good question, Mike.
Yeah.
And Tom, what tell us about this again? It's a oolong kolsch.
So OEC has launched a series of beers that's a collaboration between Ben and his wife Jai, and we have a yuzu pilsner and an oolong kolsch in that series that kind of speak to like their heritages. Ben being from Germany, and by Jai having Chinese ancestry. So like we have the yuzu pilsner and the oolong kolsch, one with like the first being a beautiful Chinese accent to the beer, and the second word being the like very traditional German style.
Jai was actually born in China as well, in Wuhan. Interestingly enough, she was on the last flight out of China before Tiananmen Square happened.
Oh, wow.
And that's one of her memories at leaving when she was about 6 years old.
And you guys created these beers because I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we at Be United saw on-premise restaurants looking for beers that spoke to their cuisine, right? And at times during the pandemic, it was really tough to get beers from China and Japan. And the thought was, I thought that if there was delays in getting them, let's try to brew our own and hope that accounts would take that leap of faith that there's something, and this is Tom's line, that speaks to their culture and their agriculture. Even though it's made in Connecticut, it can still pair well with the food, and I think it's been a huge success.
Yeah, and then we go for a very specific classic German style, and then we give it a unique Chinese twist. So I give it my influence and she gives it hers, and we work together to do it and to come up with interesting combinations. And to be fair, I've traveled a lot in Asia and I love the cuisines. I mean, I just came back from Vietnam, Hong Kong, and South Korea. And I mean, I just love going there for the food.
So this is what we should drink.
Yeah.
The oolong kolsch. Yeah. It's a little different. I mean, drinking at the brewery versus the canning.
Yeah.
I probably drank more cans in my life during the pandemic than I ever had before. And how do you program the carbonation? Is it different than the draft, what's coming off your draft?
At this point, no, they're pretty much the same. We go for the same level in the can carbonation and the keg. The sour beers are different because they go and undergo another natural fermentation in the bottle and the keg. So we dose them with a little bit of sugar and yeast right before they go in the warm room. Usually takes them about 4 weeks to naturally carbonate at around 72 degrees. Yeah.
When did you decide to first can? Because there's something I see everywhere. I mean, even when I'm here at Roberta's, there's often the Cool Ship Black Lager in can, and that's my go-to beer when I'm here.
I think late 2018, if my memory serves me correctly.
It was really funny coming into the company. Mike joined fall of 2020, and I joined January 2021. And like after I was working for Be United and OEC for like 6 months or 8 months, people started asking me, they're like, when did OEC become so present? And it was like this like series of events. The canning line came on in 2018. There was only really a year before COVID hit. And then we got a bunch of new fermenters throughout the pandemic. So we had more beer too. So it was like we were like really have had a better presence in New York City and across the US since COVID.
Yeah, we'd done a whole renovation on the downstairs of the brewery that finished in early 2020. And I have to say we were very lucky because we also third-party package a lot of cans for the Be United portfolio as well. And of course, in 2020, they shut down a lot of draft restaurants, bars, everything. So we had just finished that renovation, and then literally every tank container that came from Be United International had to go all of a sudden from all kegs to being all cans. And if we didn't have that renovation, it would have been a mess because we wouldn't have been set up for it at all.
Yeah, and tell us about the tank system. It's again more Be United lore, but I love seeing the connection between that and you.
Actually, the tank container system is particularly important also in my development to actually get to OEC. One of the funny parts about me owning a brewery is I'd never brewed a batch of beer until I did it commercially. Most people come from the homebrew side. I did not. I actually came from the quality control packaging side. So in 2018, we built a new warehouse facility up in Connecticut. We were at the time for Be United International, we were third-party warehoused out of New Jersey. And we decided we want to take that in-house. And we moved it up into Connecticut. And then after we moved in, we realized that the way we were doing draft was totally inefficient. We had, I think, a keg pool of about 9,000 empty kegs at the time, and we would send them all over the world to be filled by breweries. But they were also not all the same heads because breweries that are in Germany don't use the same heads as they use in the UK, and then the Japanese tend to use something else. There's nothing standard in brewing, apparently. So we'd always end up with this dilemma. We'd have these empty kegs. We wouldn't know where they need to go, or breweries would get kegs and they say, hey, we don't have this head. We can't fill it. So we decided we should do something totally different. We should keep the entire keg pool in the US and use all American heads so the bars and the restaurants have easy access, and instead build these tank containers that are on a 20-foot chassis filled with liquid that could go pick up beers from all over the world. And they have their own self-contained cooling units. So they would get lifted up onto the boats, then get lifted on the trucks. They would be running at cold temperature the whole time, get driven to, for example, Eschschenkeler Brewery in Bamberg, get filled, and then come back to the US. And then we would fill here.
And the tankers are really cool because they have 4 compartments. So we can have up to 4 different beers from 4 different breweries in one tanker container coming back across the ocean.
And aren't they modeled on like something like an orange juice container?
Yeah, so the technology has been used for decades. And the one unique modifier that we did, like Tom said, is we split it into 4 compartments. And they're exactly set up so when they're filled, that they're just under the highway weight limits for the U.S., so we don't have to have overweight issues.
I remember the earlier days, say 14, 15 years ago, the Be United reps, one of their expertise was that they could always hook you up and had the coupling for all these random different kegs that you'd never saw. That was a different era, wasn't it?
I'm so glad that was not mine and Mike's life.
We are still, though, educated in draft control, and we do manage all of the issues that may come about. So, but mostly it's American Sankey these days. And we just took on, by the way, we should mention this, is our own responsibility in cleaning the tanker now. Just recently,
we just took
there was kind of a delay in the process that would maybe delay us for 4 or 5 weeks for the sanitation of these. And we took that process on our own to kind of speed up things. So it's try to manage every bit of the process so that there's no weak links.
So then you get the tankers, they're emptied, you keg or can, and then you clean it.
Yeah, and then we've taken over all the quality control. So we check the valves. We check the overpressure valves. We set up the cleaning system through our own CIP systems and make sure they go out. What we did during the pandemic is actually we hired also our own trucker So now we pick up the containers ourselves, and we added this later on so we could actually pick them up from the port and bring them back to port.
Shout out to Billy. He spends hours at the Port Authority, or the port, and it's miserable. But
he gets all the beer. If it wasn't for him, like the beer.
So you guys know everything. This is like
well, it's one of the things working. I would say, Be United and OEC are definitely a family, right? And we need to know every moving part, from the warehouse guys to the truckers to who brews the beer. And and I would say when it comes to new things, we're always tasting and collaborating as a family together and making decisions together. And Matthias has always said it's most important to know the trucker, to know the warehouse guy, because those are the guys who are going to do your job.
Great. And then there's a third beer here before we take a break.
Yeah.
So what we're tasting now is OEC's Cool Ship Lager Gold Smoke. And this is brand new, and I'm probably going to defer to Ben to talk about it because he knows it better than any of us.
Yeah.
So this is a special version I decided to make off the Cool Ship Lager line. Cool Ship Lagers are open fermented Cool Ship Lager that uses traditional Czech malt and a Czech lager yeast open fermentation. That's kind of blonde, that's blonde, 4.2% on the hoppy side. This, I made the adjustment to actually go a little bit more German. So it's German malts, lower in ABV, 4.5%, about 20% smoked malt, and still Czech yeast, open fermentation. But I think it's very nice, has that just enough smoke there to really give it some body and character. But when you're dealing with a very light colored beer at 4.5% that doesn't have that much body, and you add too much smoke, it can become ashy, and that's really what I wanted to avoid. I think this is really nice because you get the smoke, the flavor, the beechwood. It's all there. It gives it a nice fullness, a little bit of bitterness on the back. Extremely drinkable. Really enjoyable. How
do you guys sell it? I don't want to say when I hear beechwood, I want to say it tastes like maybe what an old Budweiser would have in 1880.
To be honest with you, I pitch it as, and no disrespect to anybody in Bamberg, but I pitch it as a more consistent Schlenkerla Helles.
Like, we don't always have that beer available in cans and kegs, and this is something that, since we're making it in Connecticut, we can have available in cans and kegs.
Yeah.
Just a funny note on the beechwood comment. The reason beechwood was always used in smoked malt is because it's so knotty and hard to work with, so they couldn't make furniture or boats with it, right? So it was the most useless wood. That's why they smoked the malt traditionally over beechwood, yet it imparts a really nice flavor to the beer. You would never use expensive oak because you were always making your house furniture out of it.
And the sister beer to this, the Cool Ship Amber Smoke, which Ben made first, was very well received, and I think this one will be as well. There's a lot of people putting out smoked beers right now, and we know the obvious history of Schlenkerla and 500 years of Rausch beer, but this is a really good shot at it.
And like, this is, Jimmy, you're probably one of the first people in New York City to taste this beer. Cans and kegs are available in the New York City market starting this coming Monday.
I like that you guys are using the word smoke, and it's not, a smoke bomb. When you think about, so our friend John Hall has, a Camp Rauch beer and This Week in Rauch beer, and there's an intense group of people on Facebook that anytime they try a smoke beer, they try it. But I like this. I remember Threes had a lightly smoked pale ale called Fuse. And I always like the Schlenkerla Helles. I just like that hint of smoke. And the reason, when you said beechwood, I'm trying to understand how it all comes together. I feel like it's just another type of, it could be a spice or an herb or a subtle hop. Instead, you've got this little bit of smoked malt. Is that how you think of it?
Mm-hmm. The beechwood, to me, gives it a lot more of that kind of, almost like sweet barbecue twist. Like oak will be different. It'll be softer. Schlenkerla does the oak smoke, right? So if you really want to have an idea of what the different smokes do to malts, I would taste through some of the Schlenkerla line, because their traditional stuff is all beechwood smoked. But then they make an Erle, which is alderwood. They make a Weissel that we have every once in a while now that is on cherry wood, and then they do their oak smoke, the Doppelbock, and that's oak, which is the richest. If you taste those, you can actually get a different idea of what the different woods will actually do to the malt, and it's really interesting. One of the things, of course, is unlike Schlenkerla, we don't have the capacity to smoke our own malt, and so I have to go through some grain suppliers that do it, and I thought this was the nicest smoked malt I could find, and so that's the one I decided to work with. It's a German one.
It's a great way to make a beer.
Yeah.
Hey, we're going to take a short break. We'll be back in a few minutes on Beer Sessions Radio. All right.
Whether you're a chef or just love going to restaurants, you know the best ingredients are everything, especially when it comes to beef. In Northern Australia, there's a different approach to raising high-quality beef. Westholme, based in Queensland and Northern Territory, is working with the land to create nature-led Australian Wagyu. Westholme stewards 16 million acres of rangeland, guided by their natural ecosystems. They're led by a belief that if they balance the needs of their cattle with the needs of the environment, both can thrive. Westholme's team of rangelands experts and nature managers use a variety of tools to monitor and respond to the welfare of the environment, like satellites that address grass health and on-the-ground research. Cattle are happier when they have the freedom to forage and explore, so Westholme ensures that they can roam wild, foraging at will for the first 2 to 3 years of their lives. Their cows graze on native grasses like Mitchell grass, which is only found in Australia, along with dozens of other plants, herbs, and seasonal legumes. The result is a high-quality Wagyu beef that reflects the terroir of Northern Australia and a flavor suited to complement any cuisine. Westholme believes that when nature leads, flavor follows. Learn more at westholme.com.
Hey, welcome back to Beer Sessions Radio on Heritage Radio Network. Well, hey, celebrating 10 years of OEC Brewing. Just happy to be with you guys. Let's go around the room. And first, I want to say thanks to Heritage Radio Network, and we're celebrating 15 years. HeritageRadioNetwork.org. Support us, become a member. So here's the OEC crew.
I'm Ben Neidhart from OEC Brewing.
Mike Dolan from Be United.
And Tom Pavlich from Be United.
All right. So we're talking about smoked beers in a way that I haven't. And I like what you're doing. I like smoke as a subtle ingredient. And I like being able to drink it. And I like that you said the beechwood smoke you would eat with barbecue. Let's talk more about smoked beer in this way, the subtle smoking, traditions. Besides the Schlenkerla Helles, are there other European beers you've had with just a hint of smoke?
Yeah, well, we import a few of them. Almond 22 Torbata, right, is a smoked beer out of Italy. We've had a few smoked beers out of Italy, right? OG, I forget what it's called.
There was also at one point a Norwegian one we did.
Yeah, and there's, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's the historic Polish style Gradicki.
Yes.
That is like a smoked sour beer. You don't see that very often here in the U.S., though.
Well, one of the things that was important to me when we started making smoked beer, at least, is I'm very close to Matthias Trumm of Schlenkerla, and his classic style. They're 100% smoked malt. He does it himself. So I wanted to make the beers we do with smoke different from his. That's him. We weren't trying to create another Schlenkerla at all. So what I was looking to do was take the interesting characteristics of our cool ship lager, which is the open fermentation and the Czech yeast strain that we use, and the character that's built in that lager from the cool ship and the Bouteille cooler, and then to accent that with the smoke in a lighter way. And that was my goal in developing this range.
I mean, I love how your cool ship lagers taste, but how do you sell that? I mean, more people used to think that it was a sour beer. Now when I see a cool ship lager from OEC, I want that over any other.
I mean, I think all, much like a lot of breweries have a distinct taste about them. I think the OEC lagers have an OEC-ness to them, right? And For me, Cool Ship Lager's just been something that tastes unlike anything else, right? And I think all of our beers taste that way. I'm in a bit of a home team fan here, but I think we take a lot of care, and Ben takes a lot of care and thought into what he produces, and the results are seen by many.
But let's go to the OEC, the Cool Ship Black Lager. It's probably one beer in cans the last few years that I've drinking more than any of your other beers.
That makes two of us.
Again, it's defining a style, because when it's OEC Cool Ship Black Lager,
yeah.
I don't necessarily want to drink all black lagers. I don't want to drink all lagers, but this one I drink.
It's a unique beer because it kind of crosses the line a little bit with a German Schwarzbier and a Czech-style dark lager. And I think what's really nice about it is the texture of the palate and how drinkable it is, partly because it's nice and dry on the finish. You know, it's one of those beers where when the glass is empty, you get sad. And that's really what I try and do on a lot of these clean beers. Like when I first started making and blending sour beers, we do a lot of very intense stuff and a lot of really interesting and crazy stuff, you know? And so I've really stretched and gone on the far ends of that. But on some of these beers, for example, the Cool Ship Black Lager or the Cool Ship Gold Smoke, where they're 5.2% or 4.5%, my goal is to be at the end of the glass, be sad that it's empty because I enjoyed it so much. And I really work to get the balance right in the beer. It needs to be right. It needs to have flavor. You need to be able to get the yeast character. The texture needs to be right. It needs to be enjoyable in the mouth. And then the finish needs to leave you just wanting more.
When I'm talking about Cool Ship Black, I always tell, when I'm talking to a friend or an account, I always tell them, well, I gave it the bicycle test. So like, I'm a cyclist. I ride my bike almost everywhere. And like, I got home from a 25, 30 mile bike ride one day and I was really wanted a beer. The only beer in my fridge was Cool Ship Black. And I was like, black lager has just a little bit more flavor than pale lager. It's like, it's not going to be that much heavier. So like, I opened the can and I drank Cool Ship Black straight from the can. And it was just as refreshing as any Pilsner I could have possibly ever had. And like, that's kind of how I talk about this beer now. It's the dark beer for people who don't necessarily think they like dark beer.
Well, what's different about it? I mean, too often I'll drink a dark lager and it doesn't feel as refreshing. It feels like it fills me out.
Ben and I have talked about how most black lagers are too sweet, right? And this doesn't finish sweet, right? It's not overwhelming. It's not overbearing. And I don't associate sweet with refreshing on a hot day.
Yeah, and it has a decent amount of hops in it, believe it or not. And the IBU is actually quite high in it for a dark beer. We also use the debittered roasted malt, which keeps the roast character softer and not stout-like, which makes it very drinkable. But I also have to give a lot of credit to that specific yeast strain that we use with the open fermentation, particularly. It gives it that nice body. You get a lot of flavor, but that finish at the end, it just makes you want to pick that glass up again.
Yeah.
Well, Garrett Oliver used to say that the idea of a beer is that you want to not drink one or two, but four. And but what is this open fermentation quality that's not sour? It's making a sophisticated beer.
Yeah. So
just 101. We don't know what Cool Ship is. We don't know what open fermentation is when I'm drinking your beers.
So, for example, when you smell this beer, right, you get the roast character in it a little bit, that like dark chocolate, a little bit, a hint of roast. You get that kind of little bit of herbal character from the hops, but you also smell that distinct, soft kind of malty lager character in it, but not in like a sweet way, you know, like in a way that you're gonna get something here that has a lot of kind of little bit of caramel dark character, and then it's nice and soft, and you taste it in the texture. It's soft on the tongue, it fills out the mouth, and I think that really comes from the open fermentation.
And there's like, maybe this is, I don't have the science behind this, but like I always feel like with open fermentation, it allows the yeast to fully express itself. Like there's no like closed container restraining the yeast from like overflowing out of the fermenter. Like there's like for beers like this, when it's done with open fermentation in primary, the yeast fully expresses, and then you can transfer it into secondary once that yeast has like kind of spent itself.
Yes, and particularly for lager yeast, they're sensitive to this because the modern fermenters, they're quite tall, right? So the yeast likes to sit at the bottom of fermentation. And so all that weight of the liquid sits on top of the yeast, and that can make it produce off flavors and more aggressive flavors that you don't want. That's where it comes out in the softness in the beer.
Well, but before the show, we were talking a little bit about kind of American versus traditional European brewing. I think we're going there now without calling out any flaws or anything.
No, it's not a flaw thing at all. It's more of an equipment-based thing, you know? I mean, if you go to, for example, some of the traditional Czech breweries that produce blonde Czech lagers, I mean, they're still doing open fermentation. And one of the hallmarks of their tanks is that they have a very shallow cones. The angles, you're talking maybe 5%. But if you go into the average American brewery, they're basically set up for British or American brewing, so their cones are almost 45 degrees down, right? So it angles that lager yeast all the way on the bottom in a small surface, and then they're quite tall. So there's a lot of pressure and there's very little surface area. So that puts a lot more stress on the lager strains. And we don't have that. I mean, we have very shallow bottoms. They're quite wide, and then it's roughly a 1-to-1 height to width ratio where the liquid sits.
In the beginning, why did you decide to use the coolship system?
Well,
I'm sure you had so you were choosing between all these different brew systems.
So actually, the way we set up the OEC brew system was we asked the number of producers from the Be United side that had really unique systems, what they thought was really important to their system and what they would recommend for us. And some of the recommendations that came back were coolship or Bouteille. One of the other ones was that copper bottom that we have in the boil kettle. And then another one was actually that in the lauter tun, we should have some brass going in the mechanism that can mash out the grains, the knives. And it's a brass that only contains a little bit of zinc. It doesn't have any of the other stuff that you want. So it's pure brass. But that little bit of zinc will dissolve a little bit into the wort over time, and that's good for the health of the yeast as well. So when we built that system, we took in all the advice we got from all the different producers we asked, and that's the system we came up with. So
magic of minerals. I've heard of people, if you have a roof, I've been told to put a strip of zinc on top so that the rain kind of leaches off of it, and it keeps you from getting moss. Mm-hmm. On a north side. What are some other myths about a copper, for example? Because I'm trying to envision you have copper inside the boiling pot, but not on the outside.
The coolship is also all copper, and so is the Bouteille. Interestingly enough, copper has very strong antimicrobial properties. So I would say the coolship room isn't per se sterile as a whole, but as you go in at hot enough temperatures, and with copper's antimicrobial characteristics, you actually don't have any problems creating clean beers.
I remember myths and reality. I remember years ago in my early days of the restaurant business, I was so proud to get a copper bowl with a whisk for making egg whites. And it seemed like it took a lot of time, but there was some magic to it. And I remember we were supposed to only clean it out with hot water and vinegar.
Copper's very sensitive, and it can react very poorly to the wrong chemical choice. So we have to be very careful in our cleaning.
And what about the people that care for it? Are there tinsmith and coppersmiths that'll come? Do you ever have to replace parts of it? Does it wear out?
No, it's actually extremely durable if you treat it properly. I'll be honest, I love using copper. I think it's an amazing material.
Gentlemen, is copper a selling point? Because again, I think of the best pans in the world and mixing bowls.
I don't know that it's necessarily like a selling point, but like it did come full circle for me when Mike and I were in Normandy, France, and Germany with our colleague Heather, who works the Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia market earlier this year. And when we were visiting the breweries in Germany, that realization that like the ex Schenker brewery is not only a like copper system, but also a Caspar Schultz copper system, that like bringing it full circle, that like OEC is doing something in the new world of brewing, but using very old school technology. I just like seeing that like Caspar Schultz plaque up on the wall at Shangri-La was like brought it full circle for me.
Yeah, for sure.
Just a funny note, when we asked Caspar Schultz to build us a Bouteille cooler, they said they had to go back, and the last drawing they found was one they did 100 years ago.
Yeah, because it was the welding, right, that they had never done.
Yeah, so who told you to get the Bouteille system?
That must have been Chris from the Dole.
He's the only one that has one in use right now.
Yeah, but the coolship was actually also very much recommended to us by Urge in Düsseldorf, who makes their alt beer, classic style alt beer going through.
You know, that's another style of beer that, again, with color, I never think it's too heavy.
Yeah. And you know, I think alt beer kind of unfortunately gets a little bit of a bad rep in the U.S. because nobody really knows what it is. It's like a German style brown ale. What is that? But like you said,
Urge alt beer is very drinkable.
And it's beautiful. It's about 4.5%. It's extremely drinkable. It's crisp. It's dry. Great body with a little bit of fruity character on there. Really well balanced. It's a beautiful beer.
Wow. What am I drinking this last beer, Tom?
This last beer is the Coolship Black.
Coolship Black,
Yeah.
I thought so,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I'll take more because I can't stop drinking it.
Absolutely.
What other beer are we going to finish up with? And then rumor has it that it's your 10th anniversary that you even made an IPA. Why did you never make an IPA? And why am I surprised that you made an IPA?
We've never, for a long time, I didn't think we could do one, actually. One of the issues with our system that we have is because we don't have a whirlpool for making IPAs, you do a lot of whirlpool additions. So obviously we don't have a whirlpool, so we can't really do that. Then the other problem we have, which is much more of a technical problem, is that if we have too much of the hops and it gets into the Bouteille chiller, it clogs everything and it shoots everywhere, and then we have a big problem. So those were the two technical challenges that we faced. And then third was not all yeasts like our open fermenters. Because of the width that they are, the shallow cone and the height ratio, not all ale yeasts really like our system. So at the time when we bought those fermentation vessels, we were really doing traditional lagers, and we got them for lager with the sloping and with everything. So we had to face those three challenges. And then if we were going to do an IPA, we would want it to do it with our own characteristics, you know, something that people would recognize and be like, if they had, oh, that's an OEC beer, you know. So we waited a long time to do. We've done different attempts over 3 or so years to kind of get to the point where we can make one.
That's a great little intro. And for you guys, I mean, it's like you're holding in this secret about the IPA.
Yeah, I mean, it was a thing that I think was fun that we never did one, right? And everyone else was banging out a new one every month, and the whole world was IPA crazy. And I think for a long time, OEC, you know, when we kind of got past sours, we were sticking true to clean beers and lagers and pilsners, and now that whole world has come around, right? Now that's the hot thing.
In my life, I'm always about time and place, and it seems like OEC is too. It's like the natural progression. It's like after sour ales, they settled on lagers, and I remember before they started making the British style ales, like I was talking to Ben and Tony, and they were like, "Well, it just kind of makes sense. It's in our wheelhouse." And those are really traditional, beautiful beers. We've had people from England tell us that they haven't had a bitter that tastes like that outside of the UK. And yeah, it's been really encouraging. So I feel like we wait and do things when the time's appropriate.
And it's another challenge. It's fun to keep yourself challenged. Every once in a while, when you take on a new challenge, it kicks up your butt a little bit. But then you want to try and get better at it. And I think that's overall what I enjoy doing. Now, this last one that we're tasting, that'll bring you back to traditional OEC. And this is one of our anniversary beers that we did. It's a 5-barrel blend consisting of a pretty special 3-year-old barrel of a blonde sour ale that we had in a Leatherby Distillers absinthe barrel. And really nice, I think 5.5% or so. Well-balanced, bread character, fruity, tart, sour, and the botanicals are there. But it's not like the absinthe punches you in the face. It's there in a very enjoyable way. I really like this beer. I think it's beautiful. We're releasing this next week.
Well, it's great. And you always put a spin on what barrel aging is. I think for too long you think of barrel aging, it's a big stout or it's going to be a stronger beer. But this is also like so subtle. I mean, how do you guys sell this? Because again, it's drinkable. What's the, you want to break down?
To be honest, it's so limited that we don't really sell it. We just give it to our best customers, and we have maybe one location in Brooklyn and one in Manhattan that will have a keg of this in June and July this year.
We'll have a couple OEC anniversary events coming up in the city sometime over the next couple of months.
In bottles, I would say it's probably tasting room only.
Bottles is tasting room only. Yeah, we have 25 kegs for the country. So
it's going to be hot demand. Well, then, okay, now that I'm tasting this, what's the base? Is it the same base as what you would have had in your Berliner Weiss?
No. This is a blend of a couple different beers. One is a barrel-aged hoppy lager that we did with some more kind of New Zealand style hops that we had in there. And then the other one is a blonde sour base that we had blended before, and that was one barrel of it in the absinthe. So that absinthe barrel is 3 years old, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah. There's no addition of any fruit or herbs from our greenhouses, right?
No.
Yeah, it's just amazing.
But it has a tremendous botanical character.
It does. That's why I thought maybe there was something added.
I'll say this is pretty great. I felt like for a long time, OEC was the beer you wanted. It was hard to get. And also, it was hard to get Ben on the radio. So I appreciate this moment. It's an exciting year in beer. I mean, we just had Transmitter's 10th anniversary show. I know other halves coming up, Finback. But to have OEC here, really, it puts a timestamp on the careers of many of us. So congratulations. Parting words or a question. Tom, I know you have a question for Ben. Pretend you're just starting to work here.
Oh, I feel like that's one of the things that Mike and I are most fortunate about. Be United has about, I think we have 10 sales reps now across the nation. And Mike and I since we're in New York, we get to go to OEC. We go up once a month, once every 6 weeks. So like we get to meet with Ben and get face-to-face time with him all the time. So like I've seen him so recently, I don't think I have any outstanding questions.
Well, what's a question you asked him recently?
Ask me your hardest question, Tom.
When is Oolong Kolsch going to be ready? And I know the answer is 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah, that's right.
Mike, for you?
Well, I just want to say that Tom and I are in the fortunate place that New York City is OEC's testing ground, right? And I don't think any other market, even Connecticut maybe, doesn't get that experience. So we're really proud to do that. But I'd say also we need to give a shout out to the whole brewing team, right? We've got Mark, we've got Jeremy, we've got Joe. Who else up there?
We just hired Mike.
And Mike, our new cellar man. And it's not just Ben alone, it's everyone. And a lot of these, Ben is the driving force, but he always bounces things off everyone.
Yeah, and can't leave Tony, Jai, and Chloe out of that.
No, Tony, Jai, and Chloe holding it down and being the face of the tasting room. And it's not just beer there; it's everything, And it's just so nice that there's no snap decisions really. everything is bounced off us along the way. And
like,
we really appreciate that.
And like the thing being in New York and like representing a brewery in Connecticut is weird. So many people are like New York only, or like New York State only, or local. And like OEC is 90 miles outside of the city. We're more local than like your like Albany or Rochester beers. We're really close. So like I do consider OEC a local beer, and like we like position it like that because we're not only using like fruits from our greenhouses in some of our beers, but we're using local Connecticut wheat in our beers that have wheat. And like, yeah, we're here, we're close to the city, and like I love selling this beer in New York.
Yeah, and thanks to Ann at the Craft Brewers Guild for inviting us to what was it called?
New York Craft Beer Week?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
for an opening bash.
And kind of considering us, even though we're not a New York brewery, to invite us. And even though we're in Connecticut, I feel like we're close to the New York community. And
it's a great market,
Yeah.
Probably wouldn't be doing a lot of this anywhere else, I'm sure.
No, yeah.
And Ben, for you, closing words or a question for these guys?
Well, actually, I was going to thank you for having me on, Jimmy. I haven't seen you in a while now. It's been about a decade since I've been on with you last.
Yeah, that was the time I visited you, right when you first opened, and it was eye-opening. I'm not like a typical brewery fan of like visiting breweries. I just like the setting. I feel like you built it around the tasting room, and there's a lot of respect to you and your family for thinking of beer that way, and I've always related to it. I think when I first opened Jimmy's Number 43, one of the seminal beers was Hitachino, and that's probably how I got to know the B United sales reps more, because the minute we put Hitachino White on draft, it opened doors to a whole different group of clientele before people were talking about American craft beer. So, it's always been at the center of what we've done. There was one year in particular, your dad had 2 different German brewery dinners at Jimmy's Number 43. One was the Schlenkerler brewery chef, and there was a typical pairing meal. And another, I don't know if it was another year or the same year, the Schneider Weiss, the Schneider brewery people. And we had some very cool dinners as well. So I really appreciate, what you guys represent. But it comes out in the glass as well, and the type of sales reps that you have. And you're in a particular niche, but I guess the lesson is with a business, you really have to take your time and build it, and then same for you with your beer. I hear you talking about taking the time with it. When I first had your Berliner Weiss, when I first visited you, again, I said, I had heard so many brewers talk about, we need a fast beer, we're just open, we're going to put out a Berliner Weiss. And those decisions for me kind of like spoil the brewery. If you're not taking time with your first beer, then all I remember is that rushed beer that didn't taste so good. And in your case, I remember the time you took with the Berliner Weiss, so thank you.
And while we're talking about time, what's the average time of lager fermentation for our lager lines?
Of fermentation, we are in open for about 8 days on average with the lagers, and then they finish up another 9 days in closed. So it's about 17 days on average for fermentation.
Yeah, and then how long do we lager?
We lager on average then for 4 weeks at least prior to packaging.
Yeah, just cheers to you guys.
Yeah.
We can talk more. I probably have
and we have to thank all of our OEC supporters in Brooklyn, in Manhattan, that have been supporting us for 10 years. We don't talk to you enough, but without you guys, we wouldn't be anything. You got to
call them out.
Yeah,
call out a couple accounts. I know you don't like to do that.
I mean, I don't want to call anyone out specifically. I just know that there's a lot of support in Brooklyn, in Manhattan, and we wouldn't be anywhere without them. And
so
you guys know who you are.
In my mind, who would know if you have a can of OEC Black Cool Ship Lager on your list? You're a pretty cool place, right? Let's toast to that.
I like to think so.
Thanks very much for joining me.
Jimmy.
Wow, this is historic. Ben, Mike, and Tom, this is the 10th anniversary of OEC Brewing out of Oxford, Connecticut. Thanks so much for joining me here on Heritage Radio Network. Cheers to our engineer, Armin Spengen. I'm Jimmy Carboni. We'll catch you next time on Beer Sessions
Memorial
Radio.
Day.
Cheers. All right. Cheers.
Everyone.
Yep,
Thank
take
you.
care.
Beer Sessions Radio is powered by Simplecast.
Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network. Food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.
Hi, listeners. We want to tell you about a podcast we're really digging. It's called Christopher Kimball's Milk Street Radio. Every week, they travel the world to find the most fascinating stories about food, including children who harvest cod tongues after school in Norway and a detective who tracks down food thieves. And on Milk Street Radio, you can always find the unexpected. The comedian who ranks apples using an elaborate 100-point system, the secret history of grocery stores, and how to eat your way through Italy. They also interview the most beloved names in food like Jacques Pepin, Sola El-Whaley, Jose Andres, Jet Tila, Ina Garten, Nigella Lawson, and Padma Lakshmi. Plus, co-hosts Christopher Kimball and Sarah Moulton do live calls with listeners and answer their questions about ingredients, techniques, and culinary mysteries. Like, why roasting a leg of lamb made one collar's oven explode? Ever wonder why your bread won't rise or your souffle falls flat? Chris and Sarah have the answers. You'll also hear from a rotating cast of contributors, including Kenji Lopez-Alt, Cheryl Day, Dan Pashman from The Sporkful, and Alex Ainuz, a French guy cooking from YouTube. Take a listen at 177milkstreet.com/radio or just search your podcast app for Milk Street Radio.